First of all, I want to thank my partners in the budget process, Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins and Speaker Kyle Hasty, and I also want to tell them I'm looking forward to this. We've done this a number of times, and I believe that we are laser focused on delivering for the people of the great state of New York, and so looking forward to the journey over the next few months. I want to thank my extraordinary senior staff that is here today. They work tirelessly. There's never a rhythm that says there's a slow time in their lives, even as much as I promise it sometimes, but they work so hard. And I want to thank the leader of our team, Secretary Karen Persicilli-Keough. I want to thank our budget director, Blake Washington. You'll be hearing more from him. Our counsel, Brian Mahana. Director of State Operations, Catherine Garcia. Acting Director of Policy, Jackie Bray. I also want to acknowledge our statewide officials, Lieutenant Governor Antonio Delgado, our State Comptroller, Tom DiNapoli, for their work here as well. Senate Majority Leader Michael Gianaris, welcome. New York Assembly Majority Leader Crystal Peoples-Stokes, glad to see everyone here. Finance Chair Liz Kruger, Assembly Ways and Means Chair Gary Pretlow, and Senator Rob Ort representing the Senate minority, and Will Barkley representing the Assembly minority, and all my other partners in government. Yesterday and over the weekend, I spoke at a number of celebrations to honor the life of Dr. Martin Luther King. And I referenced a number of his speeches. And he said this: life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? I answered that question 1 week ago today when I presented a comprehensive vision for New York. Now, the State of the State book outlined over 200 policies focused on building safe communities and helping hard-working New Yorkers get ahead. Because, as I said, your family is my fight. Today, I'm going to walk you through how we bring this vision to life with our fiscal year 2026 executive budget proposal. A budget is much more than numbers. It tells a story of who we are, what we value, and who we're fighting for. New York is a complex state. We have great wealth and great need. And our challenge is to foster an environment where success thrives while making those who feel left behind, they can still see a path forward. That's the balance we've worked hard to achieve throughout my entire 3 years as governor, working with the leaders here today, working with the legislature. During that time, let's talk about the story of New York's resurgence. We've been through some tough years together. But during this time, we've become financially stronger, surpassed our recovery targets. We accelerated growth in jobs and in the economy. We reduced unemployment, increased the minimum wage, and tied it to inflation. We put shovels in the ground in historic infrastructure projects and accelerated the innovation jobs of the future with AI, semiconductors, quantum computing. And we've catalyzed housing production all across the state after years of stagnation. Our own Buffalo is now the hottest housing market in the nation. We made our communities on Long Island more resilient against hurricanes and severe storms. We battled wildfires in the Catskills, fought floods in the southern tier, managed snowstorms and tornadoes in western and central New York. And we've reduced crime, funded police at record levels. We've elevated our parks, our arts, our culture, and now our tourism is reaching record highs. And most importantly, we've achieved all this incredible progress without raising income taxes. But the truth is, many families do continue to struggle. Nationwide inflation, the rising costs at the grocery store, every month working New Yorkers having to face such difficult choices on how to stretch all their dollars. That's why this budget is laser focused on putting money back in New Yorkers' pockets. This will be a $252 billion budget, funded by revenue that is up nearly 8%. And importantly, we've maintained our reserves at historic highs of more than $21 billion. We're investing more in New Yorkers because we have more resources to do so and we're doing it responsibly. I know many of you were watching the transition in Washington yesterday, looking at it rather anxiously. Let me be clear. Changes at the federal level will create new challenges for our state and for programs that New Yorkers care deeply about. It's already started. And if Republicans in power there cut critical funding streams for Medicaid, education, child care, utility assistance, and the list goes on, those who are hurt need to raise their voices and direct that anger at Washington and push their members of Congress to fight for them. Because New York and other states will simply not be able to shoulder these costs on our own. So I'm looking to our congressional delegation, particularly the Republicans, to prevent the cuts that will harm New Yorkers, their own constituents. And if they fail, they must be held accountable. But even with this cloud of uncertainty, I pledge New Yorkers this: I will do everything in my power to protect your interests. Our budget priorities reflect what New Yorkers expect: common sense solutions that make real people's lives just a little bit better. We're delivering 3 major forms of tax relief. First, I'm fighting for an historic middle-class tax cut, $1 billion of investment to bring rates to their lowest level in 70 years. This means real relief for 8.3 million New Yorkers. Second, I proposed a one-time $3 billion investment to provide immediate relief with inflation rebate checks, $300 for individuals, $500 for families. And third, we're tripling the child tax credit, an $825 million investment that will provide up to $1,000 for children under the age of 4. That credit will go up to $500 for school-age children in 2026. But our support for growing families doesn't stop with tax relief. I'll direct an additional $120 million to provide free lunch, free breakfast to every single student in the state of New York. We'll save families as much as $1,600 per child every year, while ensuring that no child, no student ever goes hungry. So when you add all this up, the tax credit for the little ones, your family's inflation refund, school breakfast and lunch, plus the middle-class tax cut, this puts nearly $5,000 back in the pockets of many New York families. That's how you answer Dr. King's question. That's how you make a difference. Now I want to turn to another cost that is absolutely crushing families' budgets, and that's child care. It can exceed over $21,000 per child annually, often more than the cost of their housing. Driving down the cost starts with expanding child care options for families. That's why I'm proposing $110 million to build new child care facilities, renovate existing ones. These investments are necessary now to create more capacity than we have now to get us closer to our ultimate goal: universal child care. And I look forward to working with the legislature, the business community, our civic leaders, to start laying the groundwork to make this a reality. To deal with rising costs, New Yorkers need another form of relief, and that's removing the state and local tax deduction cap. This cap was instituted the last time Republicans governed Washington in 2017. It's costing New Yorkers, and has been, over $12 billion a year in taxes, more they're having to send to the federal government, $72 billion out of New Yorkers' taxes, out of their pockets over the last 6 years. And despite a bipartisan bill that would have addressed that issue, Republicans in Congress, including 7 from New York, have refused to act. They're actually working against their own constituents to accept a watered-down proposal rather than full repeal of the cap. New Yorkers deserve better. As governor, I say this: full repeal or no deal. Let me repeat: full repeal or no deal. Let's talk about another major driver of affordability: Housing. For my generation, your generations perhaps, buying a home was a dream always within reach. But for today's young families, it's just a pipe dream. We need to change that reality, and this budget takes bold steps to do just that. We're making a $1 billion state commitment to make New York City's ambitious City of Yes a plan that's now reality because of our investment. That means 80,000 new homes over the next 15 years, homes that wouldn't exist if the state didn't step up to help. We're also putting $100 million towards starter homes and down payment assistance for first-time home buyers. And we're taking a stand against predatory private equity firms by instituting a 70-day pause on their ability to bid on residential properties. Remember that big bag of carrots I showed you last year to give to those communities that would help us build more housing? Well, it turns out we're having even more carrots this year. We'll continue our pro-housing communities. The number keeps growing and growing. I'm so proud of this. We have our $650 million in discretionary funding, all pooled together to help these communities. But because there's such demand, we're going to add an additional $110 million. This is for the infrastructure projects, the planning expenses, the sewer that's necessary to help them grow. I know this coming out of local government. Because I've said before, the costs of housing and rent will never come down if we don't increase the supply. I'll say it 1,000 times. We have to build, 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 and build some more, and have the courage to do so. But it doesn't matter how many homes we build if New Yorkers don't feel safe where they live, where they work, and travel. From the moment I became governor, I made public safety my top priority. One of our main focuses has been New York City subways. We've launched teams of trained professionals to help those caught in the throes of mental illness. We deployed 1,000 National Guard, state police, MTA transit police, all to protect our critical infrastructure, our transit systems, and now we're giving NYPD even more support. Partnering with Mayor Eric Adams and the NYPD, we're placing officers on every overnight train from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. And these patrols began last night. People saw them. But also, it's dark down there. How about more LED lighting to brighten it up? Additional platform barriers and modernized fare gates so we can collect the money that's now being evaded. And we'll commit an additional $45 million to our National Guard to ensure that their presence is visible. And also, we're going to strengthen our laws involving involuntary commitment. Our subways, as I've said, cannot be rolling homeless shelters. We must have the ability to help those who aren't able to seek help themselves or are refusing help with the basics because they don't have the mental capacity to make those decisions. This is about showing humanity for fellow human beings who are suffering from mental illness that is literally putting their lives and perhaps the lives of others in danger. In addition to our focus on New York City, we're continuing our statewide approach to fighting crime. No governor in state history has invested more to eradicate the scourge of gun violence in our communities. And I'm proud that the data shows that our strategies are working. In 2024, we had the lowest statewide shooting rate on record, with murders outside of New York City at their lowest rate since 1965. Shootings down 28%. But we know our work isn't done. That's why this year we're committing a record $370 million for proven gun violence prevention programs, along with $50 million for upgraded law enforcement technology. I saw it in action in Buffalo when I was over there just a short time ago. It's making a difference. And also $13 million to establish new crime analysis and Joint Special Operation Command Headquarters. Think about this. Nowhere else in the nation are they doing this. Bringing together over 100 local, state, and federal agencies to share data and coordinate in real time to prevent crimes as well as solve them. And we'll finally close those loopholes in our discovery laws that delay trials and lead to cases being thrown out for minor technicalities. And we're reaffirming that there's no place for hate in our state. With $35 million in grants at a time when anti-Semitism is on the rise. And we have vulnerable locations, yeshivas, synagogues, mosques. We must protect them, and this money will do just that. And we're putting more state troopers at the northern border, where we've seen a sharp uptick in fentanyl and weapon seizures. Because when it comes to protecting every single New Yorker, I'll use every tool at our disposal. Our fight for New York's future also means leading the way on climate action. This year's budget directs $1 billion, our largest climate investment ever, to accelerate New York's clean energy transition. These funds will support critical projects in clean energy generation, create good-paying jobs, and reduce energy costs for New York families. We also must be prepared to meet the challenge of the federal government, walking back commitments to offshore wind, a key energy source in our transition to renewables. Addressing these challenges now will help ensure a healthier world for our children in the future. But we cannot ignore the fact that our children have challenges already, today, right inside the classroom. The numbers tell a stark story. A recent poll revealed that over 72% of teachers, high school teachers across the nation, report that cell phones in the classroom are a major disruption for their students. And in fact, 95% of their students have access to a smartphone. And those kids are receiving, on average, 250 notifications a day throughout the school day. Now, as a mom, New York's mom governor, these aren't just statistics to me. I know how hard it is to get your kids' attention. My kids used to text each other under the kitchen table to each other, meaning they weren't talking to each other. It started back then. It's happening in our classrooms. We're not developing the skills we need because kids are distracted with the cell phones. And how hard it is for our teachers, trying to teach algebra and geography, and they're competing with viral dances and messages from their friends and sometimes threats, bullying. How do you pay attention to the subject at hand when this is going on? It didn't happen when we were younger. That's why last year I convened roundtables all across the state to discuss the impact of these cell phones on children's ability to learn how to interact eventually as adults, communication, but also I was worried about the effect on their mental health, and this was coming from the teenagers themselves telling me what was going on. The stress they're under was enormous. So we consulted parents, students, educators, administrators, advocates, local leaders, and we worked to devise a solution to this complicated challenge posed by smartphones in schools. As a result of these conversations, I'm announcing today a proposal that will transform our classrooms, return them to a place of learning. And that is a new statewide policy to make classrooms in the state of New York distraction-free so our children can focus on the things that matter, learning. By the start of the next school year, every student will be required to disconnect from their devices during the school hours, bell to bell. That means during class, at lunch, in the hallways. Our kids will finally be freed from the endless disruptions of social media and all the mental health pressures that come from it. Schools will have flexibility in how they implement this. Districts can decide how they want to store devices. Many are already doing it. And they can ensure compliance. And of course, there'll be exceptions for those students who need devices for medical reasons or to assist non-English language speakers or for students with learning disabilities. We'll accommodate all of them, of course we will. And the state will provide financial support for this transition. But every school must establish a policy to help these students finally thrive without the addiction of their cell phones during class times. That's just the first step, though. We need to give kids safe places to play again. Let them be kids again. Our new Unplug and Play initiative will steer young people to healthier pursuits and nurture minds and bodies. We'll fund 100 new playgrounds create 100,000 out-of-school activities. And we're building on the incredible popularity of our last year $150 million investment in the New York Swims Initiative. We'll add another $50 million for more pools to be constructed because I know they're making a difference, and provide free swim lessons to tens of thousands of New Yorkers. There are a number of other elements, very important elements of the budget I want to discuss. My budget director, Blake Washington, will go into more detail. But as top line, first off, school funding. We're beginning the process of taking targeted steps to modernize the state's outdated foundation aid formula. We're replacing a 20-year-old poverty metrics data with current census data to more accurately determine student need. This will ensure that state dollars go to the students who need them the most. And let me be clear, I know any change is hard. And whether it's working or not, the status quo is always easier, right? That's why it's important to know that the vast majority of schools will receive more money than they would have, even without these adjustments to the formula. And I want to thank Bob Nagna and the Rockefeller Institute for undertaking review and providing really thoughtful recommendations. Now let's talk about one of the largest spending drivers of our entire budget. That's Medicaid. Nearly half of all New Yorkers rely on publicly funded health insurance. The state's share of Medicaid funding this year will be over $35 billion. Over the long term, we'll need to take action alongside the federal government to manage this growth, which is not sustainable for New York taxpayers on the current trajectory. We'll take smart steps to control costs while protecting services. And we've secured federal approval already for a new managed care assessment that'll generate $1.6 billion annually. And we're investing $1 billion in our safety net hospitals. We need them, and continue our innovative social care networks. We'll continue to ensure that every New Yorker has access to quality health care regardless of their zip code or their circumstances. There's also another essential service that must remain strong: our public transit network. 2 years ago, we faced a fiscal cliff at the MTA, and working with the legislature, we took action. We secured over $400 million in operating efficiencies, provided over $1.1 billion in annual funding, all of this to ensure that the lifeline for New York City's economy, and therefore the state's economy, remains affordable, efficient, and reliable. And we must ensure that the MTA has the capital funding required to keep the system running and to deliver new and expanded services that the commuters deserve. MTA is developing an updated capital plan to propose to the legislature and myself. Once you receive it, we'll determine the best way to fund it. And this obviously will be resolved before the end of session. And I'm confident we'll deliver a plan that advances critical projects, like extending the 2nd Avenue subway, connecting Queens and Brooklyn through the Interborough Express, new Metro North stations in the Bronx, and faster service in the Hudson Valley. Beyond public transit, we're also strengthening our broader infrastructure. Just over the last year, we improved over 3,100 bridges and enhanced more than 2,300 lane miles of highways. And now we're proposing an additional $1 billion for our DOT capital plan, bringing this to an historic $34.1 billion. We're advancing transformative projects all across the state, replacing the I-81 in Syracuse, similar opportunities, the Cross Bronx Expressway. Here in Albany, replacing the Livingston Avenue Bridge, reimagining the waterfront along the 787. Same in Buffalo, we've been working on the Kensington. We're making long overdue investments, also with our $1 billion Pave Our Potholes program, which I saw in every corner of Long Island, potholes that used to be causing damage to vehicles now finally being repaired. We need robust support for local infrastructure as well. Again, coming out of local government, I know the stress is on our towns and cities to have to come up with the necessary money, especially in our cold weather parts of the state, where the roads decay every year because of all the snow plows and the salt. We have to keep making these investments, and we will. So I've outlined some of our major top-line priorities for the next year, but there's much more to this budget. that I believe will make a real difference in people's lives. That's what this is all about. At this time, I'd like to ask our Budget Director, Blake Washington, to give us an overview of the state's finances and walk us through some of the other important investments that we're making. Blake Washington.
So thank you, Governor. Thank you for the opportunity to serve the people of the state of New York. It's been a year and a half. It's been a lot of fun. So, and thank you to the legislative leaders, the controller for being here today, the partnership throughout the year. We appreciate it. Our colleagues, the commissioners that are here, and my colleagues in state government. Just thank you very much for being here. So we're going to go through some slides that keying in on some of the items that the governor has already spoke about, but we'll just jump right in. As the governor mentioned, let me get here we go. Working the slides here. As the governor mentioned, we have a all-funds spending total in the executive budget of $252 billion, which is a 3.6% increase over last year. The all-funds budget includes things like the state operating dollars, federal funds, capital spending. If you look at just the raw state support, state operating funds, that's up 7.9% to $144 billion. Importantly, the executive budget does not include any income tax increases and includes several proposals to address affordability. Those proposals in total equate to $5 billion. We will return surplus revenues to state taxpayers throughout the state, 8.6 million of them through the inflation refund. We'll cut taxes for the middle class. This will be the second time that under the governor's leadership we've cut taxes for the middle class in 4 budget cycles. The taxes would, as a result of this action, be the lowest level in 67 years, and for a cumulative benefit of $2.7 billion. We'll enhance the child tax credit, and we'll also provide for free school meals. Now, to accomplish all this, the fiscal health of the state of New York must be in sound shape, and pleased to report that it is. Our economy is strong. Last year, the S&P was up over 23%, the NASDAQ 29%. And as all of you know, the state of New York has an outsized dependence on the performance of Wall Street. It's the number one driver for revenue in the state of New York. So when they do well, the state of New York does well. Unemployment remains low at 4.3%. Personal income will continue to grow over the planned period, also impacting our receipts. High inflation rates that we saw during immediately following the pandemic have subsided. But as we know, the prices have not fallen commensurately. That kind of goes back to the $5 billion impact that the governor's budget provides. How do we get money back to the people to address those high costs that linger today? CPI is projected at 2.8%. And I'm not keeping up my slides. Here we are. Forgive me. Underemployment. We have, as everyone knows in this room, our economy was impacted disproportionately by the pandemic. Our jobs took a real dive in the midst of the pandemic, and it's taken us a while to rebuild. But as of spring 2024, state employment has returned to pre-pandemic levels, which is really great news. But even more so, we have 400,000 current jobs to open throughout the state. The state is open for business, so hopefully anybody that's out there hearing this address or knowing about it, the state of New York has a job for you in every corner of the state, upstate, downstate, and everywhere in between. The state's revenues are strong. This time last year, our view in the division of budget was less optimistic than it was today. We had some flagging receipts which improved over the negotiating period, and working with the legislature, we were able to restore some of the items that we had initially had in the executive budget just on performance of receipts alone, reflecting and adapting in real time to deliver last year's budget. Coming into this year's budget, since then we're about $6.5 billion over plan projections from last year. And coming into 26, we believe that will carry forward. We think that PIT, personal income tax, will drive the variance in 26 to the positive of about $4.7 billion. The state's fiscal health is sound. It's based on a few different measures that we follow tightly in the division of budget. Number one, the governor's initiative to provide for the state's highest level of reserves, $21.1 billion in reserves. Those remain at the historic levels. They're not touched under the 26 capital plan, financing plan. The state has a AA+ credit rating. We're coming into this year and to fund some of the initiatives that the governor's laid out. We have $5.3 billion in surplus revenue receipts in the current fiscal year alone. Under the governor's leadership, we've committed $13.6 billion in pay-go to avoid more costly debt. That's just over the last 4 years. We've paid $11 billion to further reduce debt payments in the out years. We now have the lowest debt-to-income ratio since the 1960s. We also, I should note that our cumulative out-year gaps remain manageable. As a result of this plan put before the people today, the out-year gaps are changed by approximately $4 billion across the plan period. So this budget does not inflate out-year gaps either. On the immediate horizon, there are several unknowns that could negatively impact the state's economy. Starts in Washington, D.C., where uncertainties abound for all of us. We're still learning. We're a day into a new administration, and I think that we all know there's going to be changes. Certainly, but as it relates to the economic position in the state of New York, tariffs and federal tax policy could impact inflation. Immigration policy looms large. Geopolitical shocks and changes in the international trade could result in supply chain disruptions. Changes in federal spending priorities, of course, are something that would have an outsized impact on the state of New York. And I think that you have to look no farther than some of the stuff that was in the public domain just last week, a list of potential revisions in spending for health and human services programs totaling $2.5 trillion over the Congress's plan period. So those things, when we look at those policy prescriptions in black and white, we know that those would be a real shock to the programs that New Yorkers hold so dear. So on to spending growth. The big items in this year's budget is a 14% growth in our Medicaid program and a 4.7% growth in school aid. In any year when dealing in the state of New York, those are always the two cost drivers in spending. And that carries through the current year's budget. The Medicaid number that you see before us is also influenced by an MCO assessment that we provided in last year's budget, where we will draw down a federal share to make targeted investments in the health infrastructure over the next 3 years. This chart before you here kind of just details again where Medicaid and school aid are. We'll get to those in a moment. But social services, the number here is elevated. You can see that's driven largely by the tremendous amount of child care investments we've done in just the last 3 years. We've more than doubled child care subsidies working with the legislature. In the mental hygiene, we've done historic investments to increase the number of beds in all sorts of care facilities, all sorts of levels of care facilities. But just diving into Medicaid for a moment, before we go into Medicaid, the governor alluded to this earlier, but we have to recognize that when we talk about Medicaid, we're talking about seniors and children, expecting moms, persons with disabilities, and everyone in between. 7 million persons in the state of New York, our friends and neighbors, are recipients of the Medicaid program. When you add the Essential Plan and Child Health Plus, you now are up around 9 million persons in the state of New York that avail themselves of publicly sponsored health insurance programs. We're very proud of that. We're very proud, the commissioners here, to know that we have a robust level of coverage between publicly sponsored plans and commercial plans. We have a deep penetration where the people of the state of New York, when they need care, they have accessible care at their fingertips. Having those many enrollees and that level of penetration does cost us $35.4 billion in the current year. It's a $4.3 billion year-over-year increase. Most of that increase is driven by stubbornly high enrollment post-pandemic. About 900,000 persons are on the Medicaid program that did not exist pre-pandemic. We also have strong growth in the managed long-term care program, enrollment growth. Pharmaceutical costs are elevated, but also included in that number is the impact of the MCO tax. Again, drawing down the federal share and reinvesting it in the state. We're sort of just on as a financial plan matter, you kind of count twice. So that sort of impacts that value. I'd say that the number here is large, and I think that we're in the division of budget, certainly the senior team, we have a continuing dialogue, I think, on on how to restrain health spending. It's one that will continue throughout the year in consultation with advocates and consumers, associations, and the providers. I think one of those discussions we've already begun with health associations is, what does the state of New York do? What do we ask of you to run a business that just makes it onerous? What costs you more money? What are regulations that can be changed that don't have an impact on patient care, doesn't have impact service delivery, but maybe makes your job easier on a day-to-day basis? Those are the questions we're asking for of the health associations. It's been a productive, they've been eager to advance these ideas, and we'll hear them out. But also, we shouldn't shy away from tough decisions, particularly when our singular goal is to preserve state resources for the consumers that need it most. Responsible stewardship in this space means that we shouldn't be committing resources to management organizations that are often shadowy, that would not exist but for the Medicaid program. State taxpayer dollars fueling bulk mail campaigns, print media campaigns, digital ads, all intended just to scare people and to mislead people. We don't need to pay for that with state taxpayer dollars. We don't need to use state taxpayer dollars to fund AstroTurf campaigns, planes over the Capitol building. None of that is necessary for the use of state taxpayer dollars. We should all be alarmed by that. Because every dollar that's spent in that sector and that side and on that nonsense is a dollar that's taken away from the people. So I think as we look into the Medicaid budget, we're always looking to sharpen our pencils. We're always looking to refocus and to get back to basics, make the common sense choices to sustain the program in the long run, but trim away the fat and the unnecessary nonsense as we move forward. As I alluded to, the MCO assessment will provide $1.6 billion in reinvestment over the plan period each year. We'll invest in our hospitals and nursing homes. We'll provide for expanded safety net transformation. We'll also offset some of that large year-to-year growth on state spending. Just last week, the governor, Friday, was at Jamaica Hospital announcing some of the investments that we started in this year's budget to transform Jamaica Hospital into the community hub that the people so desperately desire. We've also done something 6 months ago at Kaleida. There were other initiatives announced on Friday as well, which are in Glens Falls and in Montefiore, really wonderful wins for the communities. We want to keep building upon that. The MCO assessment helps us do just that. On education, as you're all aware, it makes up a sizable portion of our budget. We provide $37.4 billion in school aid, which is a $1.7 billion increase year over year. And in just 4 years under the governor's leadership, we fully funded foundation aid for the first time, and simultaneously increased school aid by $8.1 billion in just, inclusive of this budget, in just 4 years' time, a 28% increase, giving the resources to the districts to teach our leaders of tomorrow. As the governor alluded to before, we have updates to our foundation aid formula. We are going to replace the outdated census poverty data. We're going to change it with what we call SAPE, S-A-I-P, S-A-I-P-E, a universally accepted variable for catching up to meeting the students where they are, more accurately assessing need. We have free and reduced price lunch data, which will be swapped out for economically disadvantaged data, a universally accepted metric, which counts your number of public assistance recipients, SNAP recipients, a more truer measure of what poverty might be in a school district. We drive additional aid under this plan to low-wealth school districts, and we guarantee each district in the state of New York will get at least a 2% annual increase. Home stretch on transportation, we have a $32.7 billion assumed in the executive budget for the MTA's capital plan. These data you've seen in prior iterations from the MTA itself. We have this budget calls for a $3 billion commitment from the state of New York, $3 billion from the city of New York. The MTA itself has offered that they can provide $12.3 billion in capital financing through the plan period. And based on federal shares as it exists today, about $14.5 billion from the federal government to fund the MTA. Of course, we will need to adopt a capital plan working in concert in tandem with the legislature and the MTA. And that's something that will warrant further discussions in the next handful of months. And as the governor alluded to as well, just talking about the MTA in a vacuum, we want to make sure that the state of New York knows we're listening. Throughout the fall, we've heard from contractors and labor and all the persons that interface with our state's roadways. And they've said, there's a lot of stress on because of inflation and inability to take on new projects. We're robbing money from the next capital plan, pulling it forward to pay for the stuff today. The governor's budget provides $800 million to just provide for those inflationary increases in the core program, which is a win to make sure that projects are delivered on time and in a cost-efficient manner, because the more you delay, the more costly these projects get. We have $100 million for CHIPS and touring routes, and $100 million for non-MTA transit systems. So I think that today, if you want to join me at 3 o'clock, we'll have a more detailed technical briefing going across the entire budget. And we're here, certainly as a division of budget, for all of you. If you have any questions or concerns, we have a wonderful team that's willing to work and willing to dig in and provide answers 24/7, 365. So I just want to say, as a recap, Governor, thank you very much for allowing me to serve in this role. I'm having fun, and believe it or not, and let's get on with it. So thank you.
Blake, you ready? All right, good afternoon. Thank you all for staying. I know you all have deadlines, so if you all want to leave right now and take care of what you have to file about how great the budget was, I understand. No takers? Okay. Any questions?
All right, let's start with Jimmy.
Great. Governor,
This guy. If this is about the Buffalo Bills, I'm happy to answer, Jimmy.
the
The prospects for next weekend.
Or do you think it was just that someone dropped a pass?
You're going to go there? Really? The Superior team won.
So, focused on something less important, which is the budget. As I've covered these over the years, governors typically kind of hold the line on spending, kind of push back, and usually it's legislators and advocates who are pushing here. I look at this budget, you've kind of only proposed small tweaks to school aid as opposed to the big fight you had last year. On Medicaid, you're not advancing any major restraints or costs beyond CDPAP, which was actually enacted last year. And with a $5.3 billion surplus, the bulk of that is going out the door. I'm wondering, are you avoiding fights in this budget? Is this just sort of a low-friction, easy pre-election budget?
No, I think when you get to your fourth budget, you've accomplished a great deal of what you set out to do. I've already have a legacy now of what we've achieved on behalf of New Yorkers. So as much as it might be entertaining for the press corps, a lot of what we still have to do does not necessitate a conflict with the legislature. We have our shared values of understanding that we will work together to put more money back in New Yorkers' pockets, and that's why our truly creative initiative to put $5 billion back in New Yorkers' pockets instead of keeping it or spending on something that's going to be more recurring is a smart policy. I just heard from the leaders. I went over and spoke to people afterward, and they said it's a good budget. And why not start with a good budget and focus on some policies that I think are really important, like cell phones, and working on some discovery reform, and working on involuntary commitment for people who need mental health care. So what we're talking about is we'll work through the numbers, and the numbers are solid. I mean, we wouldn't, this is a balanced budget. There's no income tax increases, and we have record reserves. So I have to factor all that into whether or not we're going to be able to increase spending. If those three facts were not true, there'd be a different dynamic. But we have benefited from a better, healthier economic forecast, but also, the tax receipts are up from Wall Street, which is something we pay attention to. A year ago, we had a different picture. 3 years ago, we were looking at the possibility of a recession. So a lot has changed. So we're always adapting to making sure we're meeting the needs of New Yorkers. And one loud cry we heard this year was, we're getting crushed by the high cost of living here. Can you do something to help? But also putting $1 billion toward building more housing, $1 billion toward the environment. These are all important priorities that the legislature also shares. So I don't think it's It's not by design either way, it's just this is how it is. We've had a lot of challenges in the past, and this is a path forward that meets the needs of New Yorkers. Blake, is there anything you want to add to that?
No, Governor, I think you hit the right notes. I would just say that, as you noted, the budget it closes the gap. It does not materially add to out-year gaps, and we're in a good, strong fiscal position.
Thank you.
All right, Nick. Governor, you may not be wanting to fight with your fellow Democrats here in Albany, but it certainly seemed like you were willing to take a much more aggressive posture with House Republicans, especially if there are spending reductions at the federal level. Mm-hmm. Should there have been some sort of mechanism built into this budget or future budgets in the out years to consider or accommodate or at least plan for a likely reduction in federal aid, either in the Medicaid program or other areas of social service spending where we rely on for the federal government?
I was crystal clear. States are not going to be able to backstop the loss of federal dollars. So you have to put the responsibility on the people who created this, and that will be their elected leaders in Washington if they support a budget that results in significant cuts in programs that New Yorkers rely on. So I'm just simply framing where the debate should be. It should not be with the state legislature or the governor. It should be with those who are part of an administration if they support Donald Trump's budget plans. Again, it's still very early. This is all evolving. But just based on what they've already been telegraphing, that the responsibility goes on the Republicans who are elected to represent the state of New York to restore cuts. If there's a budget put forth that hurts New Yorkers, then they better be the ones who fix it. And by the way, New Yorkers would also like $12 billion back in their pockets every single year instead of having it go to Washington so they can waste it down there. That has been the state tax system since Abraham Lincoln was president. It is double taxation to not be able to deduct what you're already paying in state and local taxes. And as I said, full repeal or no deal. Just go back there and fight for that. So yes, I'm putting the responsibility where it belongs. Anything to add on that, Blake, anybody?
Not much, Governor. I'll say that we also have a strong partnership with the legislature. There's some of the smaller, you have a sound fiscal budget. Some of the smaller actions, we always adapt in real time, but these big items, Governor, cannot be solved on a state side alone. And I think you hit the right note there.
But just to follow up on Nick's question, I mean, you're framing the political question, which is the onus is on Republicans to take responsibility for this. Many of them are proud of, they're running on cutting Obamacare subsidies. Let's say they do that, are you prepared to use the rainy day reserves? I mean, I think many New Yorkers are probably wondering when they read about those things how the state government is going to backfill those things if they are cut.
Elections have consequences. People in this country and people in this state, not the majority, but people decided who they want to lead this nation, knowing full well that there would be consequences to programs they may care about, and they made a different decision. Elections have consequences. I cannot stand here and say the state of New York is going to backfill all the federal dollars. No state governor can do that, and I'm not prepared to say that. It'll be challenging. Yes, I have worked really hard to build up our reserves because of the vulnerabilities that we had when I inherited a 4% reserve. I said we have to get it up to 15%, and we're hovering right around there and continue to do so. $21 billion in reserves is extraordinary. But I'm not saying today I'm putting that money to backfill so no one feels the consequences of elections. 2026 will be right here very soon.
Same on, Phil Murphy's letter to Trump asking him to repeal or whatever congestion pricing. Is the same answer to that?
Well, that comes with $15 billion more they'll need to give New York if that happens. That's $15 billion of lost investment that we will need to have, not from the state, but from the federal government.
Governor, Mayor Adams went to the inauguration yesterday, and he's been seen cozying up to Republicans. He's been a Republican in the past. He even has an interview that's supposed to be coming out with Tucker Carlson. Do you think he went down there to protect New York's funding, or did he go down there for his own personal and political gain?
I cannot speculate on people's motivations. He said he's there to advocate for New York, and that's exactly what he said. So who am I to second guess that?
And also, Governor, a follow-up on Brian Benjamin, his case was dropped. Do you think you should have given him more of a chance to prove before the charges were dropped? Do you think this is an exoneration? What do you make of that?
I will take the Department of Justice and the United States Attorney's Office at their word. They feel they do not have the evidence to move forward, and therefore the case was dropped. The case is dropped.
How much of a factor did the Rockefeller report play in you crafting your education budget? And also, what do you say to people who would argue that you didn't go far enough in reforming foundation aid?
This is the start of a journey. As I said, changes are tough. The status quo is the status quo because enough people have never challenged what that's all about. We have never been afraid to challenge the status quo. Believe me, I know. It's hard. And what we began last year was a process to use the right data. I mean, for anyone to think that we're using 20-year-old or 25-year-old data related to poverty and census as determining where the money should go in 2026, 2025, that was wrong. So what we did is we took information from them to talk about what the right metrics are to be studying for that. So that was an important contribution from that. But also, we will get this right. I mean, we have to make adjustments based on other factors as well going into the future. But for now, at a time when school districts are still reeling from the high cost of inflation, we need to make sure that we're not having them have to endure cuts, because if you kept them where they are, they're basically almost 3% behind automatically, because the cost of everything they need to run their facilities, run our kids' education system, is basically shortchanged because the cost of inflation continues to go up. Hopefully we'll get to a time where inflation is not such a factor, but it still is, and it's making it more expensive for everything. State government's more expensive. We didn't even talk about that as one of our cost drivers. Our costs are up. You know, we put the fuel in the snow plows that the DOT uses, and the salt barns, and our construction projects, and everything we touch has gone up as well. And that's been a major driver as well. So it's happening in our school districts. We're going to continue adjusting the formula. This is not the end. We're not finished with it yet.
Okay, Tom in the back. Governor, right here. Last night you released a statement regarding birthright citizenship and what President Trump had signed in terms of the 14th Amendment. In that statement you said New York is prepared to take any action within our power to ensure that that part of the Constitution, the way you interpret it, is enforced, I guess. What action would that be in that aspect?
That would be a lawsuit that's currently being filed by the Attorney General's office. We're working very closely with the Attorney General. I want to thank Brian Mahana for anticipating, since the election, all the areas where we might need to take some legal action to protect the rights of New Yorkers. I've said all along, I'm going to stand up and protect their rights. So this is basically, as one of the very first things that come out of Washington, to literally deconstruct the United States Constitution and say that language that is actually in there does not matter. I would simply encourage the leaders in Washington to focus on what people actually ask for when they're electing you, which is you're going to help us with the cost of living, you're going to help us with all these other issues that I don't think this was top of mind for people. These are people that are literally born in the state of New York. They're born here. They don't know any other place. So this is an attack on our values, and we work closely with our Attorney General's office, and I anticipate that she'll be filing litigation in coordination with other attorneys general, and I suspect their offices will be very busy. Anything to add on that, Brian? I want to ask Brian, is there anything to follow up on that?
Yeah, I mean, the president and his team have been signaling for some time that they were going to take aim at birthright citizenship, and so as part of the Empire State Freedom Initiative, we've been working with the AG's office on this issue for some time, and in particular, the Department of Health and the Office of Children and Family Services have helped provide data and information to help support the Attorney General's lawsuit.
Would you go beyond the lawsuit to keep these individuals from being deported?
Well,
Law enforcement, something of that aspect?
we're just reviewing scores of executive orders. My understanding that this one goes into effect 30 days. So it's prospective. I don't believe it envisions removing people who are 50-year-old individuals who happen to be born here from parents from another country. So again, it's really too early to say anything other than, litigation is our first defense against this. And this is not in line with New York values. We're going to take steps we need to take to protect people born in our state. They're New Yorkers.
The city of Buffalo is facing a $17 million deficit projected for the first quarter. What's in your budget and going forward? What's your plan to help the city, address that shortfall?
As a city of Buffalo taxpayer, I also know they'll be looking at their tax structure as well to help them get to a place where other cities are who are more financially viable. They have the lowest tax rate in the state, and I know that when they go forward, they'll also be looking at how they can make themselves more independent of needing state dollars for their basic operating. But Blake, do we have anything contemplated in this other than?
There's a continuation of the last year's one-time AIM increase for municipal governments. The city of Buffalo would get a renewed $5 million for that purpose. There's also, I would just say that to the extent that there's housing initiatives or things that they would otherwise be spending their own resources on for shovel-ready sites, and we have a bunch of different policies in the executive budget that help to meet municipalities' needs. Again, shovel-ready sites, childcare development centers. Doesn't really. It may offset some of the costs that they have in the hopper, but at least for the gap, the one item that we have is the $5 million in AIM.
So if you're the city of Buffalo, what should you be excited about in this budget specifically for Buffalo and Western New York?
You'll be excited that your residents are going to get $5,000 back in their pockets if they have a family and a few young children. So this is a broad-based affordability agenda. We're also going to continue the investments in law enforcement, as I saw so wonderfully demonstrated a short time ago. Those investments that are going toward everything, using all kinds of technologies to solve crimes, whether it's unmanned aerial systems, whether it's the license plate readers. So I will continue supporting the city of Buffalo's law enforcement efforts significantly. We're also going to continue working and building more supportive housing. I drove past the former Perry Street projects. This is an extraordinary project with primarily state dollars that has taken what was a wasteland of abandoned projects built in the 60s and turning it into beautiful homes. So you'll see major investments in homes. Our initiatives with Kaleida Hospital, we just announced money over at Roswell, a significant portion of money going for their cell and gene therapy unit. So I can't say the city of Buffalo, here's a chunk of money, but we can break out for you the money we have spent and will continue to spend in the city of Buffalo for really transformative projects.
Okay, Alex.
Governor, you talk about border security in your budget this year. You want to put more state troopers on the border. You want to expand to license plate readers. North Country and border representatives have talked about how law enforcement, state law enforcement, local law enforcement can't work with federal border agents. They can't collaborate because of the state's green light laws. Are you looking at reevaluating the green light laws, especially in light of what Tom Homan has said he might do to states that continue to block?
No, I'm talking about adding state police, I think it's $8 million, additional $8 million, to just help with the border security when people come through the border, especially when it comes to drug interdiction. We're also working with the Native Nation up there to help facilitate our resources to find drug traffickers and human traffickers and others who are creating chaos. And we also, this is not about letting people committing crimes get away with it. Our policy now and will always be that people who commit crimes will go through the criminal justice system, and at the end of it, if they're convicted, they'll be deported. There's nothing that stops us from cooperating with law enforcement in these areas. So I think people misunderstand the impact of state laws. We're not changing them. Commissioner Bray, do you want to add anything on this?
Yeah, absolutely. So we already coordinate with law enforcement, between state law enforcement and Border Patrol along the northern border. There's tremendous amounts of coordination, and that includes coordination around any time there's a criminal warrant out. It includes coordination around any time we have people crossing who are on existing watch lists or who are known to have existing, problematic associations. What this money is specifically going to do is to beef up our capacity to coordinate on investigations with Border Patrol, and then beef up the type of technology we need to intercept trafficking, whether that's guns, drugs, or human trafficking.
All right, Jason. Governor, a question about putting the officers on the subway trains. I wanted to ask, when you first rolled out, you announced that you were doing this, it really sounded like the state was fully funding this. Then a few days later, it's made known that the city is going to pay for half of it, the state is going to pay for half of it. First of all, was that always the plan, and is this kind of like a reimbursable program? And then second of all, I wanted to ask, given the sex for OT scandal and all these overtime scandals in the NYPD, why are you funding overtime for the NYPD, and why aren't you putting the state police on trains?
Well, first of all, NYPD is dramatically larger by multiple numbers than the state police force. So we don't have the scale in any sense of the word. I will say this, I've invested more in beefing up the ranks of our state police than any governor. We've had from 2 graduating classes a year to 4, trying to increase our numbers, because I have used them in countless ways. I mean, gun interdiction, and they actually were very involved in the shelters for migrants. They're involved in the subway protection. So I still don't have enough. Aside from individual scandals, it does not mean the rank and file NYPD are involved in this. And what we could do is contribute. I cannot create more people. I cannot create more police officers at the NYPD. They need to hire more and have more people go through academies. That's essential. But until such time, I can't wait for that to happen in order to beef up the presence of police officers on the subways. So we are picking up the overtime costs for these individuals, approximately $77 million to get us through this next budget, and then we'll pick up more after that. So this was just to get us in, get it started with no further delays. And I believe, maybe the Commissioner knows, this is a reimbursable program based on what they have to submit us the invoices for the time that they spent working, and then we reimburse her. Catherine?
That's absolutely correct, Governor. And they did start last night primarily on the letter lines. And this is where you want to be using overtime. So that you can flex up and down. So there are appropriate places for overtime in a uniform agency. This is one of them.
Was the plan always to split it 50-50, or was that decided after your announcement?
I wasn't negotiating the details of this. I said I want police on the subways figured out. Someone wants to amplify that. I said, we're not talking about, we're just doing it. They need the money, put the money there now. Let's get us through this next budget. We'll see how this is working. But let me point out the success of what we've done in the past. Last January, after seeing a decline in subway crimes in the fall, which we were proud of after we put more police and cameras and our SOS teams to help those who are homeless, for some reason last January we saw about a 29% spike. I'm off a little bit, maybe 28% spike in crimes on the subway last January. And that's when I sat down with the mayor, the commissioner of police, and everybody. We sat in a room with my team of experts and said, what do we need here? So we concluded more bodies, but they didn't have more bodies hired. I said, well, why don't we put state police in there as well as the National Guard? It's the first time we put the National Guard in. And we'll also continue ramping up resources. We also know that at this time we have this. I want to do even more, so that means we have to pay the overtime. So it's just part of an overall strategy that I believe will start having an impact. Again, we know the vulnerabilities of the subway during certain times of the year as well. It just makes sense. There's more people with challenges, our homeless population, people with mental health challenges, riding on the subways when the weather's really cold, like right now. This dissipates when the weather breaks. So you don't need as many police officers on the subway trains, et cetera, probably later spring, early summer. So then as our Director of State Operations said, we can make adjustments. These are not hiring people that we may not need later. Flexibility comes from having overtime payments that will reimburse to ensure that they're being accurately calculated. Anything else, Commissioner?
No, ma'am.
Catherine?
No, that's correct, ma'am.
Governor, the new president is taking a very hands-off approach to the tech sector. I was curious, with him returning to the White House, to what extent, if any, are you kind of rethinking how the state ought to approach regulating AI, particularly when it comes to algorithmic bias?
Well, you know what we did with the students and the children? And my view is that we have to do something to protect the most vulnerable population, which is under 18-year-olds. The young people are being bombarded all day long with addictive algorithms that they do not request, but also creating this sense of anxiety that has just been amplified so many times over, which is one of the genesis of our decision to go after cell phones in schools. So we'll continue working on this. I do think that if there is to be overall regulation of AI, the federal government is the place to do it, and time will tell whether or not there's any change in the administration. I've not heard any prioritization of this in the Trump administration thus far, but we'll see what happens. Anything else on that?
I would just add that we are looking to do some more in this particular budget, particularly around child porn, on images created with children's pictures.
Is the companion app legislation still in there? I didn't see it in the budget book, but it was in the state of the state budget book.
The companion.
Oh, yes.
Right, so we have a proposal in this budget, in the state, and in this budget, to make it so that if an AI companion, if an individual starts talking about self-harm, they're connected immediately. They're disconnected from the AI and connected immediately to real help. Obviously, we've seen real tragedies happen with, kids under 18 who are driven to take their own life because of the relationship and the feedback they're getting from an AI bot.
But to return to the original question, Governor, it sounds like you have not rethought your approach to AI with Trump back.
No, I'm not rethinking a lot of things with him in office. We're just carrying on business in the state of New York, delivering the best service we can for our constituents. And we'll deal with the challenges as they come. A challenge just came. We have litigation working with the Attorney General's office, and I think there'll be many more ways that we're going to stand up and do what we have to do to protect New Yorkers. But I also want to make sure that, we just focus on what we have to do here, which is running the great state of New York. It's the largest economies in the world. We have a lot of work to do. We're going to continue creating more AI jobs. My challenge is to create the power generation for that. Offshore wind is an important part of our strategy, so I would encourage people like the new EPA administrator who knows what those jobs mean to Long Island, and if they're all of a sudden disappear, I think that's a question you might want to ask, like what are you going to do to help your neighbors get their jobs that they were counting on? Because we're also counting on the generation of that power from offshore wind and other sources, so we can have a robust innovation economy that powers AI, powers Empire AI, powers all the jobs that are coming, as well as quantum computing, working with our companies like IBM. Just had a conversation with them recently about this, and semiconductors. So all this is happening, and it's so exciting that New York is really the epicenter of this, but we have to power it, and I hope the Trump administration understands that this is important to us and will not constrain important sources of power like offshore wind.
To the Medicaid spending, in the budget book, we talk about the fact that it's unsustainable growth. Is there a long-term plan as to how to create that, make that sustainable? And also, I also wanted to ask you about the CPAP transition. In the first week, DOH reported that there was only 5,000 people transitioned by PPL and did not confirm whether they were fully transitioned into the new program. Is there any sort of contingency plan if they need to extend beyond the April 1st deadline?
I'll Catherine answer that, but on the first part, obviously we're always looking for ways to constrain growth. But we have a number of dynamics, and Blake outlined a few of them. One is that when people think about Medicaid, these are people in nursing homes. A significant amount of money spent on this is for your parents and grandparents and your neighbors' parents and grandparents in nursing homes. It is very expensive. Also, making sure that all of our children have health care. That is a basic human right, that little kids do not go without health care. We have a lot of children in need. This covers them. CDPAP has been a driver of this. Legislation put in place before my time allowed there to be sort of this Wild West attitude toward a program that had very little restraints, very little controls, and as a result, you see people took advantage of this, a program that went from $2.5 billion about 6 or 7 years ago, now $9 billion. Our population didn't grow that much to justify this. So there's a lot of abuse out there. So when you talk about reining in costs, those are some of the areas we're going to, but also our hospital transformation programs that we're investing in is looking at hospitals that are having financial problems, are at risk of failure, and finding alliances where they can team up with another healthier hospital system and get them out of that trouble. And that's taking up an enormous amount of our time statewide, from Long Island up to Buffalo. There are so many facilities that are in need of this kind of help. And so, again, you solve for that. That's a driver of costs that over some time will continue to go down. The CDPAP reform should drive down the cost because we don't think the money she spent on these middlemen, that she spent on where the needs are. But also we have our Commission on the Future of Healthcare, which is directed to come up with recommendations on savings as well. Catherine, any?
And Governor, you really did cover most of it. Clearly, like this is true of the entire country. The boomers are aging, and they are the primary users of Medicaid money. Money is people over 65. But we do have in place both the Commission on the Future of Healthcare and working with all of our advocates to sort of stabilize our healthcare system coming out of COVID and make sure what we're paying for is actually providing quality care.
And if I can add on, we do have a key investment in this budget, Governor. We have $45 million for waiting lists run through the area offices for the aging to help people in their own homes to not get on the Medicaid program in the first place, have some limited interventions, home-delivered meals, companionship. Those sort of smart, targeted investments are the ones that help to keep people in their homes off the Medicaid program, thriving in a community. But Governor, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think there are programs certainly as it relates to CDPAP, the abuses and the folks that took advantage of it. We're not talking about the consumers that took advantage of this, right?
Of course
We're
not.
talking about these shadowy corporations that would not exist but for the Medicaid program. 100% financed with state taxpayer dollars.
And the transition with our deadline in April. We have some.
We actually feel pretty good about how the transition is going. It's only been in about the last week that PPL actually ended up getting the full list of all of the consumers to be able to do direct outreach, as well as having the independent living centers finish up their contracting and come online to begin onboarding folks. So we feel cautiously optimistic that we're on a good pathway.
That's actually an excellent point, that there was resistance from the current intermediaries to even turn over the names. We as a state do not have the names of the people that are in the system. That tells you another one of the serious flaws of when this was built, that it was just create a system which has very little oversight, if any, and we don't even know how many people are in it. And so we have to rely upon these intermediaries who are being affected by these changes to turn over the names of people that are in the program. So these are some of the challenges, but we feel confident at this point, and certainly if we need to adjust, we'll make some adjustments.
So you, sticking on this topic, you say that there's going to be $500 million of savings by transitioning to this one company. Can you detail what that $500 million is from? How much is that from you guys banking on thousands of New Yorkers not being able to register in time and not giving them care?
No, none.
Register.
That savings relates specifically to the administration of the program. We do not need 700 middle persons to pay the bills. If you look at some of the mailers and you look at the pictures of a consumer and the person that provides care, that's the relationship the governor is not interfering with. She wants to promote that, and she wants consumers to live with dignity in our communities. What you don't see in the picture is this FI and the people that have multi-million-dollar ad campaigns. They're somewhere in the distance in the picture, maybe. But you don't see them. That's what we're eliminating. We're eliminating that extra layer of no quality to the consumer. We're providing we're protecting the consumer's relationship with their caregiver. Number one, full stop. That's where our goal is, and just eliminating administrative loads for any particular contractor.
And if I may be just more specific on that, because I think this has been reported in the press, we are paying multi-million-dollar salaries to the administrators of this FI for the program. You start to put those together, that gets very large very fast.
Also, on the timeline, I know the State Health Department said 5,000 people. That still, doesn't put you on track to be able to register 280,000 people by April 1st. So what are you going?
Yeah, that was week one. We actually feel like we will be very, very quickly seeing those numbers go up because we haven't even had our partners start adding in the people that they are already working with
Right.
into the program.
Right. And again, we're reliant upon the fiscal intermediaries to provide the names of people, and they're trying to do a masterful job of scaring people, if you have not been paying attention. They're trying to scare people that we're fighting for, the ones we want to get the care, the one we want to eliminate these middlemen who are, again, many have been following the rules, but many have not. And when you have people that are, living in Florida, charging New York State taxpayers as if they're in a house taking care of a person in need, and you have these people, and the lawsuits are starting to blossom. And I think there should be more scrutiny and examination of what has been going on here without this oversight for years. I'm the one who calls it out and says, wait a minute, what is happening with our taxpayer dollars, but also these poor people who are being taken advantage of and may not be getting the services they want? I want to make sure that we have controls in place and safeguards in place to make sure that no one ever has the fear that is being created by these individuals. So we're going to get it right. We're working hard, but now we're finally starting to get the lists of people. We should have had them all along. I mean, this is a classic example of how not to do something in government. And now we're paying the price for this. New Yorkers are paying $9 billion, and I do not believe these people are getting $9 billion worth of service. I want them to get their own provider. I want them to feel secure. I want to keep them in their home as long as possible if we can. These are the people I care about, not the people that are scamming off the program in the middle.
If they're not registered by April 1st, or they lose coverage automatically?
I'll just say that when we adopted this provision in last year's budget in consultation with the legislature, the governor's charge to myself, to the state operations team was the revenue is the savings are very, very important. What's more important is preserving the care relationship. That's paramount. We will adapt as we go.
Thanks, Vaughn.
Governor, wage growth and employment growth are expected to slow in New York in this upcoming fiscal year. Why is that?
Job growth is leveling off. We have 400,000 open jobs.
The rate of growth is slowing, according to the briefing book.
It's been on fire.
Yeah, I'm not saying that. What are you referring to? Tell us what you're referring to.
When the division of budget projects those data, we consult economic houses across the board. There are blue chip consensus that we align with. These are macroeconomic trends in the economy that people forecast forward. Reminding each other, as Catherine just said, we have had substantial growth in the last handful of years. We're on job creation post-pandemic. We were building back, but you still have the higher base. So naturally, as you get to a higher base, the amount that you grow year to year just slows down a bit. Obviously, I think even in that forecast, put an asterisk next to it with what might come as we always qualify with risks. With with federal economic policy, monetary policy, that could also shift those data as well. But right now, we feel very confident of that level of growth. We use that to feed it through all of our models and how we project revenues for the state of New York. That's how we put together our financial plan.
And the rating agencies?
Yep. The rating, we provide all this as a level of disclosure to our rating agencies. We talk to people throughout the year, economic pros that tell us you're a little high or a little low. We have a finger on the pulse there, and we feel very confident in those data.
I am concerned about possibility of tariffs, for example. I mean, our North Country businesses and the ripple effect that we would have could be severely damaged by any disruption in our trade with Canada. I mean, if you go to the northern border, and the northern border starts, Erie County has 4 border crossings. You go all the way on up to the North Country. There's an incredible synergy, which is not the normal context of dealing with a foreign country. Those are our neighbors across the border, and a lot of people, from New York go to school in Canada. They come back, same thing. And the cross-pollination of industry, especially in our transportation manufacturing corridor, where we want to be purchasing billions of dollars of new train cars for the MTA. Those are expecting manufactured upstate, but some of them have been Canadian companies, and some of the supply chain comes in from Canada. So this is what we also have to calculate, and I want to be convening people who are very thoughtful in this space to help us project what some of the headwinds we should anticipate if that happens, but how we head them off. Is what is going to be required of us to be able to maintain the growth that's been on fire for a number of years. But as you're right, I think it's an excellent observation. You go so fast, of course you're going to level off because you just can't keep at that pace. But we have a lot of jobs in New York, 4.3% unemployment. When I was growing up, there was a 1 in front of that. It was at least 14.3%. So that's the world I come from.
Great, all right, we got last one, Marie, and then everybody can ask Blake the rest of them later this afternoon.
Yes, yeah, okay, got to get back to that, yeah.
President Trump is again moving to withdraw from the Paris Climate Accords. Last time around, New York helped form the U.S. Climate Alliance, passed a landmark climate law. Your administration has faced some challenges in implementing that law, saying you aren't going to hit the 70% renewable target. You've delayed implementation of the cap and invest regulations that would help achieve those goals. In light of this pullback on federal action, do you plan to accelerate that process with cap and invest, or are you too concerned about the upfront costs to New Yorkers?
I am the co-chair of the U.S. Climate Alliance right now. We issued a statement in response to the announcement that President Trump was withdrawing us once again from the Paris Agreement. We are going to continue on the path we're on. We're going to continue investing. That's why when you heard me say today the $1 billion to basically fund the projects that we would have under if cap and invest was in place today, so we're actually accelerating our growth toward a renewable and clean energy environment, and also to create the jobs that we're anticipating in that space. The fact that about a month ago, I signed the Superfund, the Climate Change Superfund Act. I think that also goes toward establishing that we are nation leading and will continue to be nation leading when it comes to protecting our environment, but also making sure that those who are responsible for the pollution and degradation of our environment pay for it and not the New York State taxpayers, as we're spending billions of dollars in resiliency to offset the impact of record floods and droughts and all kinds of environmental challenges that we're living today. So nothing can be read or interpreted as me pulling back from our commitments, because you're hearing here today in this budget $1 billion that was not there. It's the largest investment in protecting our environment ever in state's history. So we understand our responsibility. We're going to continue leading, and I'll continue working with other states to chart that path forward. All right, thanks, everybody.
Governor,